back as a very young lawyer, got involved in the Sacco Vanzetti case, which radicalized him. He was the executive director of the International Labor Defense, a major communist-led left-wing legal defense organization in the 30s that conducted the defense of the Scottsboro boys. Patterson was a tough, austere man whom I got to know. I know his daughter today quite well. But Patterson suffered no fools patiently. He was a very, very disciplined, strict human being who was totally devoted, to the struggles for the defense of African Americans. I got 6,000 pages from the FBI, actually at the behest of his daughter, of his FBI file. And it is typical, it is kind of interesting. You notice that the one, about third paragraph down, this FBI informant is talking about Patterson addressing a public meeting at Tabernacle Baptist Church in 1952 in Chicago. And he says that Patterson says, quote, "He loved this country of ours so much that he would gladly die for it. Yet I hate its government. I hate a government that would send thousands of black soldiers to fight for democracy in a foreign country when they have no democracy here at home." And that's the most subversive thing, that he loves this country. He loves this country, but he doesn't love this racist government. And with a few twists and turns and variations, it's something you kind of hear the Tea Party saying today, than one of the ironies of the whole thing. This is Louise Patterson, who was a major figure in the Renaissance in the late 20s and early 30s, and who actually had been married to one of the Renaissance figures, Wallace Stirner. And she was part of a coterie of African-American women in the late 40s and early 50s. Thelma Dale, Victoria Garvin, a whole series of black women, Louise Patterson, Queen Mother Audley Moore. These women all played a significant role, particularly in the peace movement during this period, and fighting to link the peace movement to the struggle for racial justice. And some of them, despaired because women's strike for peace was developing at this time, and for a period it took a strong stand, for black liberation against racism, but then that kind of faded away to the disappointment of this remarkable group of women who fought to bring women into the labor movement, who fought to link the peace and black liberation movements and so on. 1951, Patterson puts out this remarkable document, Weak Charge Genocide, which lists hundreds and hundreds of pages of murders, assaults against African Americans, in which he attempted to take before the United Nations and attempted to bring to various organizations in Africa, in Europe. As a result, the FBI was particularly exercised and unhinged by Weak Charge Genocide. This is the Trenton Six. These are 6 men in New Jersey who were accused of beating a furniture dealer to death. 4 of the men had ironclad alibis. The other 2 also claimed to be totally innocent. This was a victory. This is, first of all, one of those rare instances when the Civil Rights Congress and the NAACP worked together, and the Civil Rights Congress called people into the streets, constantly battling for the freedom of the Trenton Six, and it eventually ended in, they were originally convicted and then later exonerated. 2 died in prison very young, but the other 4 at least were released from prison. This is a union rally for a very bad picture, I know, for the Trenton Six. This is a rendering of the Trenton Six case by one of the great artists of the time, radical artist Charles White. This is the Martinsville 7. Now, this is a very different case. In Martinsville, Virginia, 7 men were accused of raping a woman who was a known prostitute, and it's one of these tricky, convoluted, very sick Southern cases. And in this one, there was also went into the streets there as Patterson marching in Washington with a wife and child of one of the Martinsville defendants. They were all executed. And typical of the time, these incredible assaults on justice. This is the Willie McGee case, which may be the most famous case of the time. And this is a period actually when there's a tremendous amount of activity and struggle in defense of African Americans in attempting to advance their economic and political interests and the like. But Willie McGee in Laurel, Mississippi, was accused by a woman of raping her. It was kind of an open secret that she had a long-standing relationship with Willie McGee, and then when discovered, she cooked up the rape story, which is not unheard of, which is has certain echoes of the Scottsboro case. But this is Willie McGee. The battle to save him, and there's a very good book out now called The Eyes of Willie McGee, although it doesn't deal as much with the movement to save him as it should. I recall, for instance, in 1951, I guess it was, the Labor Youth League, we pulled I guess what they would call a flash dance today. We had this demonstration. Everybody was supposed to go to Times Square at something like 7 o'clock in the evening and to hold banners and signs inside their coats. And on signal, to unfurl the banners and pull out the signs and start shouting, "Free Willie McGee." And the tip-off was a couple of people rented a room at the Astor Hotel in Times Square, and on signal lowered this huge banner, "Save Willie McGee," and that was a sign for all the hundreds and hundreds of people to raise their signs and start marching around Times Square. The cops were ready. They had so many spies and informants in the movement, they knew all about it. And the horses came at us, and you know, they broke it up in a matter of 10 minutes. We were all dispersed, but we considered it a successful demo nevertheless. As one of the pamphlets. This is one more interesting demonstrations. They give you a sense of the connecting links from this period to the 60s. You know, this whole history is generally unknown. This is a group of trade unionists who chained themselves to the Lincoln Monument to free Willie McGee. And it took hours for them to saw the chains off. This is Lorraine Hansberry. I'm going to end it very shortly, folks. I realize I'm going on a bit long. Lorraine at that time was writing for Paul Robe's newspaper, Freedom, and was also a member of the Labor Youth League. And we were asked, Lorraine and I, and a wonderful young African-American guy named Jim Jones, the people that you meet, you often wonder what happened to them. And I often whatever happened to Jim Jones. He had been an electrical worker in Schenectady and came down to New York City to do some organizing in Harlem with Roosevelt Ward Jr., who later became Frederick Douglass Ward, the founder of the Negro Ensemble Company, who was the leader of the Labor Youth League. We had some incredible people. Robert Fogel was the student director. He winds up winning a Nobel Prize for declaring that slavery was a garden for the human spirit. Well, you know, some of us went off in the other direction. But in probably late May or early June, I haven't nailed the date down yet, of 1954, Lorraine and I and Jim were asked to go to the National Conference of the Youth Council of the NAACP in Washington. And, you know, there were a number of Labor Youth League members, because, you know, we were operating in these broad circles who were members of the NAACP. One of the things we wanted to do was tell, you know, the NAACP, of course, was traditionally very, very sensitive and uptight about left-wing influences within. And we wanted to tell people who were members of the LYL, cool it. You know, don't do anything to discredit us or anything, you know, to bring attack on us, upon us from the leadership of the NAA. What we didn't know was there were already radical currents running through the organization among the young people who had nothing to do with the Labor Youth League. So they're throwing resolutions in. Get the Sixth Fleet out of the Formosa Strait. Stop U.S. imperialism. And we had absolutely nothing to do with it. And Clarence Mitchell, who was the legislative director of the NAACP, gets up and says, there's a communist claque operating at this.